Welcome to the Echo Essentials podcast.
I'm Scott Clark.
And I'm Dave Dale.
Coming up on this show, really interesting, one of the members of the Dionne family, from the Dionne Quints family, will be joining us to give us more insight on what it was like to be one of the family members. Because we've so focused on the the Dionne Quintuplets that there was how many children altogether was there?
Well, before the quintuplets came, there's already 6, although one passed, but there was 5 living Dionnes before the quintuplets, and then they had a couple more after, right? So I think 14.
Yeah, really interesting insight that we're hearing, and more on the museum as well. But that's coming up. But one of the things that was in the news, real hot right now, that I need to ask you, just from a journalistic side, because I have a different lens. I was a broadcaster for many years, but I wasn't a journalist. So, and we've talked about this, about different stories. Stu Campaign, when he was in here, I asked him why he did the story. So in Bay today, they did a story about the Mattawa Conservation Authority and a toxic workplace, and the HR director came forward, and people have left, long-term employees have left. And I read it, and I was thinking to myself, why would Bay Today do a story like that? And the reason I ask is because I'm sure there's tons of toxic workplaces. It happens all the time. And especially you get turnover when someone new, especially a leadership role, comes in. There's always turnover in a workplace when that happens. Why would they pick up a story like that?
Well, you got to put it into the broader picture of what the conservation authorities are facing right now, with the provincial government cutting funding and decreasing their mandates and forcing them to make change. So you have an executive director that's brought in to handle and manage that, as well as it's a publicly funded agency that is doing public work. So there's a public interest, whatever happens there. So in the midst of all that, they are also, because of the clash and the situation that's going on, they've unionized, right? And they're organizing the first collective agreement because of the changes the provinces are requiring, and the way the executive director went about making those changes and implementing whatever changes were needed to fit in with the new reality. So this is a major change in the conservation authorities across Ontario, and this one's up on the Hill. Very public story on it just being there in the first place. 20 years ago. I have actually the proposal for the tower up there that they did for the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund funding that required it. So, and I covered its change to go up there, the problems that were faced. It's a very public story, conservation authorities. So it was also like Conservation Authority was in the news just a couple days prior. East Ferris has decided they don't want to chip in on the ski hill, right? Which is part and kind of
the Conservation Authority owns it, right? Mattawa Conservation Authority owns the ski hill?
the land that the land, right? And it manages that land. It manages a bunch of Conservation Authority parks, and it has that mandate to do public work that it needs to do. So it's
What does the Conservation Authority do? I know I should know, but I don't. What is it they do?
My broad understanding of it is that they are an insulator between the pressures of development and the need to protect public spaces and public resources like water, right? And they make sure the septic systems that are put in are looked at and certified. And
why wouldn't and I ask this because I asked the Conservation Authority to come over to my house because I have some shoreline erosion. I want to make sure that I do it right. There's a bit of an application process that you got to go through. They've been excellent, but it was interesting that I'm dealing with them, and then they were saying that in this instance, this might be an M&R thing too. So you need to contact the M&R, and there's all these levels of why wouldn't the Ministry of the Environment be involved or resources be involved? What's the difference between them and the Conservation Authority?
Well, they have segregated mandates because one body.
Can I say this? Would it be that the province has province initiatives, which would be the Ministry of the Environment and Resources and things, right? And Mattawa Conservation Authority has regional concerns that they're going to look after, because our region's probably very different than Strathcona or something, right?
Provincial-wide scope and local concern and local needs, right? And why that they're a separate body? A lot of the townships can't afford to have their own, and maybe the North Bay City's Environment Department could do some inspections. Maybe some of that can happen, but what about all the rest? And the MOE is the bigger picture items, right? Minister of Natural Resources, different responsibilities, and they're all underfunded as well.
Right. They've been cut back for like 30 years, slowly, more and more and more.
So the Conservation Authority is jointly funded by the municipalities that need one, right? So it's a collective sort of response to a need. With provincial funding mixed in.
Do we know anything about the whistleblower in the article?
Well, I just had a call from somebody that used to be on the board, and he thought that the story was shoddy journalism, and that they should have had the other perspective. They shouldn't go ahead with that story without getting a fuller picture, right?
No, but I think in the story, they tried to reach out to the executive director, but there was no response.
Well, that's what I tried to tell him. And I said, some people don't think journalists should do their job unless everybody's comfortable and ready. Well, that's not journalism, right?
Right, you can't. It's like if you have to wait for both sides to respond, someone could just play the waiting game and you would never get the story out.
In between the lines, what I read there was that Jeff, who's the managing editor there, and seasoned guy, he usually doesn't have a whole lot of patience for when people put him off and then don't get back to him when they're supposed to. Like you would think that story would have been planned and part of their 3 o'clock, right, on their newsletter. It was something they would promote. In my mind, what I saw and what I read was, okay, the executive director said she was going to try to organize a 3-way conversation with the HR guy, herself, and Jeff to address these issues that he was raising. Then she didn't get back to him. And he probably lost patience with that idea and said, I'm running with what I got. So I gave you a chance.
When you hear a story or a journalist say they didn't get back to us, and I think you're going to change how I've always thought of this. So if you're hunting a story down and you're calling me and you say, Scott Clark, Dave Dale calling, can you give me a call back? I'm assuming that's not how you leave a message, because you would leave a message. Dave Dale calling, we're doing a story about the toxic workplace environment at the Conservation Authority. Can you get back to us? So you get a sense of, and we want to run it today. You would get a sense of, oh, I better get back because they're about to do this story on this, this, and this, right?
Yep.
Okay. So initially I thought it's just, Jeff Turrell calling, can you get back to me? It's like, well, sometimes we're busy. You can't get back to people right away.
No, it's more specific.
It's really specific.
And in this case, it sounded like she understood there's a story and what the story was about. She had an idea of how she wanted to do it, and he lost patience with her, not getting back to him in time, and he wasn't going to let the story die. Like, he was going to run with it. And Jeff's done that before. He doesn't have much patience if he doesn't get a return as is expected, and you can judge that the way you want. It's a real story, whether she gets back to him or not.
And what do you think will happen next? How does this play out traditionally?
Well, the Nugget story today.
Oh, Nugget story.
It looked like, I didn't see the byline, but it was probably Jennifer. She followed up, and he's locked out of his, they changed the locks, so he's done there probably, right? I think he's heading off to Romania anyways for his father's funeral, so I think I just read it real quick before we did this. Ben, make a note. I'll have to change that fact if it's not the truth. The Conservation Authority's board side hasn't really been fully articulated, right? And the fact that they're negotiating a contract with the newly unionized group, and there's a lot of different things at play. So this should be very interesting. And I think.
Look at the smile on your face.
I think it's great.
You like this.
Well, you know what? I've been hearing stuff about the staff not appreciating the direction and how things are being handled for a year. I went there a year ago and covered one of their meetings because I had started hearing little things like that, and I wanted to get a little feel for it for myself. I understand that these type of things happen, and if
but you're smiling.
Yeah.
For those that are listening, Dave's got a great big smile.
Well, it could have been dealt with.
He's filled with joy, all this turmoil.
These things don't get popped like this unless they're festering, and this is festered for at least a year.
That was very graphic, and I don't want to go any further into that analogy. Look at, and you're even happier again when you get graphic.
But anyway, so let's talk about an upset Dionne member family, and see if I don't smile there too when Brian Callahan gets a chance to say what's on his mind.
Yeah, let's get into that. Let's get in and hear from Brian.
Today we're talking to Brian Callahan, a descendant of the Dionne family, and with the Dionne Quints Museum up until very recently. And he's going to take a bit of a break, but we're going to talk about some of the issues, the journey to get to where we are, and of course, mentioning and plugging the 90th birthday coming up in May. A lot going on that weekend.
Yeah, I guess they have a full slate for kids and everything. They're going to have those bouncy castles out in the, and they're also putting on the play at the DeViti Club. Jerry Mendocino's going to be doing it again this year, so looking forward to that.
Must be bittersweet every time there's a celebration for the second half of your family, right?
Yeah, well, it's part and parcel of the whole situation.
Can I ask you, just with that question, what do you mean second half of the family? What does that mean for everyone listening in?
Well, it's you have to understand that for the first 9 years of the Quintuplets' lives, they were separated from the rest of their siblings, 9 brothers and sisters. And when they returned to the family at 9 years of age, it's a different family. They didn't know each other, and so it's basically 2 families in one when they came together. So we, like Dave refers to them, second family coming into the fold, and it's just the way it went.
It was tragic, right?
It certainly was.
Yeah.
So up until then, so the family, so the family had 2 separate lives, really, right?
Basically, yes. Their siblings weren't allowed to associate with the Quintuplets for the 9 years that they were held away from the family across the road in the nursery, or what was called the Defoe Hospital, which was built across on Highway 94, across from the original birth home in Corbeil. Not Callender, as a lot of people think. It was Callender. It wasn't. The doctor lived in Callender. The birth was in Corbeil.
And so where did the parents live?
Right across the road in their house.
With the Quints? With the other kids?
The Quints were taken away from the parents.
Oh, so they didn't. So the Quints lived separate from even the parents.
That's right.
And how often could the parents visit?
The parents could visit, if everybody's healthy, once a day for 20 minutes.
And that wasn't insane at the time.
Well, that's what happened.
And people were in charge, were claiming that it was needed to do for the health and the care of the Quints, but also it was much easier to market and promote and there was other reasons.
Well, what basically happened was they built the hospital across the road, the nursery. Then they fenced it in. And there was a staff house built for the nursing staff. There was a guardhouse manned by OPP officers, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. My grandparents would walk across the road and wait outside the guardhouse until the doctor decides if everybody's healthy. Okay, Mr. and Mrs. Dionne, you can come in and see your children, but you can only see them for 20 minutes, then you have to go.
So when I arrived here in 91, how the story has always been presented to me is, it's this incredible miracle. At the time now with technology, and we see quintuplets, not all the time, but we see multiple childbirths. And but back then in 1934, it was a miracle that you could have 5 children survive, and also that this was a global phenomenon, and people marveled at it. But the story has so many complex layers to it that today when we share it, it's like, wait, this is insane what happened back in 1934. So do we celebrate it?
Well, I guess for the public's sake, yes, we celebrate it. For the family's sake, I really don't think we should be, but what can I do?
No, but you have this is your legacy. This is your family. This is, there's been a lot with City Hall, like the moving of the home, who's going to have the home. This was a significant historical event because the other piece because it was outside my generation and many people, that this was massive. This was people came from around the world to North Bay when it was just a single dirt road coming up the highway.
Over 3 million people in total.
Which is incredible. I don't think, we wouldn't have 3 million people in this country.
We don't have 3 million people checking out any of the websites or Facebook posts groups in North Bay now.
Right,
No.
Okay.
With all the world to come from.
Well, at the time of their birth, they were more famous as a tourist attraction than Niagara Falls.
Come on.
Their dolls actually outsold Shirley Temple dolls 2 years in a row. Famous people came to see them. James Cagney was here actually making a film, Captain of the Clouds, at the time. Jimmy Stewart, Mae West, W.C. Fields, Amelia Earhart, weeks before she disappeared on her flight.
And for the young people, that would be like George Clooney, Julia Roberts, Brad Pitt, all came to visit, right? Yep. So that they were massive
Yeah, they came
stars.
from all over.
Yeah. And because it was how many years and decades, or when did it all of a sudden started, when I say turn, the true story started to come out about how these children were separated from their family, how I'm sure your parents didn't live in the lap of luxury, or your mom didn't, and like it was, yet if 3 million people came here back then, they would have generated massive amounts of money in the economy of Ontario.
Oh, for sure, yes.
And how did the family benefit from that?
The family never saw any of that money. What happened was my grandfather actually put up a souvenir shop across the road from where the Quints were, and as well as the midwives. There were 3 or 4 different souvenir shops that sprung up to make money. There were fertility rocks available for the tourists. And if they ran out of fertility rocks, they got the neighborhood kids to go into the bush and bring some more rocks back out and put them in the baskets so that the tourists could pick up fertility
rocks.
Yeah.
Yeah. It doesn't matter where you go. There's probably fertility rocks and all those different things.
Oh, yeah. And what made the most famous was it was a natural birth. There was, of course, you're a farming family, so the more kids you have in your family, they had 14 kids in all with the Quints. Back then, Roman Catholic, it was a sin to use birth control, so and they were identical. So astronomical chance
Odds.
of having identical 5 babies.
Yeah, and back then, today we have fertility drugs
Yeah.
that can help with multiple childbirth, and
And you get your own reality show nowadays.
you get your own reality show. Yeah, the Dionnes had the ultimate reality show. When I'm trying to think of the documentary I watched, it was through the CBC though, and I started seeing how they viewed the children. The children were in a zoo. The family was in a zoo.
Yeah.
And people had to go and view the children, and they paid to view the children. And it was like, okay, this is feeling really icky now. It doesn't feel right.
Well, what happened was they built a observation area. It was like I describe it as a U-shaped building with a one-way screen on the inside, like a hallway. And twice a day, the gate would be opened and the public outside the gate would race in to get a good viewing spot because in the center of that U-shaped building was a playground. Twice a day, the Quints would be brought from the nursery and placed in the playground so that the admiring public could watch them play. Now, there was one-way screen facing them, so that the idea of that was they didn't want the Quints to know that they were being watched. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't soundproof, of course. They knew they were being watched. They could hear the people.
Yeah.
People oohing and awing over, oh, look at how pretty they are, and oh, isn't that one wonderful, and all that stuff. And of course, they knew.
That must have messed them up pretty good.
Well,
Yeah, right? Well, if you any parallels to the social media phenomenon now with teenagers and kids, where it's very much like you're not growing up in a natural environment with the real sort of stimulus and you're wondering, and you got many eyeballs, more than anybody else would ever have. And, kids these days are messed up over it. They have anxiety issues. I can imagine that must have been very similar.
yeah. And when they did go out, when they went to Toronto to meet the King and Queen, when they came, they had a police escort of six police officers would escort them. The one time they went down, the whole family went on the train. It was an outing. They brought the whole family, but the only ones that got to meet the royal couple were the 5. The rest of the family says, you got to stay in the room. You got to stay in your hotel room. You can't.
And that
go
must have messed them up as well. Your mother must have went through a lot of.
The word I use is animosity.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And I when I was doing the tours, I'd get comments on that all the time, and the terrible. How can they continue doing that? How could the government get away doing something like that? And I'd have to take a step back and look at them. They says, well, they're still doing it, really, when you think about Indigenous people.
Right.
Whenever the government starts getting into paternalistic mode, it just it rules everything.
And some of my hardest times in that house when I'm doing tours is when I have people with the Indigenous background, with relatives, and they relate their stories to me.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, when I go home after that, I got to have a few beer.
How did you grow up here?
Yeah, I've been back in North Bay since 1957. I was born in Espanola in 54. My mom was a teacher, and she met my father in Espanola when she was teaching there, and they married and had me in 1954 and another brother in 57, and then we moved here, and we had 2 more brothers here. Mm-hmm. And so...
When you moved back here, were you a big deal?
No, not really. Later on in life, I actually was bullied by a gentleman that I worked with, knowing my background and my grandparents and everything. He'd use the Dionne name to kind of make fun of me.
Really?
Yeah.
And so was there a time, or there was a time, when the height of the popularity, there was so much going on. There was I'll say an incredible investment by the government of Ontario that reaped the rewards of that investment, but not the family. But a switch must have turned at a certain point where it's like, oh, popularity's done. Almost like, they turned off the social media.
Well, Kind of, yeah. When they returned to the family at age 9, what happened was by that time the big house was built. That's where Nipissing Manor is now.
Yes.
That was the house built for the family by the Ontario government, paid for using the funds from the Quints Trust Fund.
So the Quints paid for it.
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
So they moved into that house, and they stayed there until
Wait,
they were
you said
basically
they.
able to move.
Didn't you all move together?
Quints.
Like the family?
The whole family moved in
Okay.
there. There were 11 bedrooms, 7.5 bathrooms. It was a big house.
Yeah.
It was a gorgeous house.
Yeah.
Used to play hide and seek in there when it stood empty because my grandparents built a smaller house just down the road later on when all the kids were moving out. But and there were still people coming to see them, trying to see them, until all 5 of them finally, around the age of 18, packed their bags and they all moved to the province of Quebec.
And why Quebec?
They're French Canadian, and I guess they wanted to get away from the horror show that they were put through here.
It wasn't Ontario.
It wasn't Ontario. Yeah.
Basically, yeah, good. That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't Ontario. And so since 91, that when I arrived here, there's always been different times, very, very rare, if any, of the Quints would ever come back.
Yeah, they very seldom ever came back. 3 of them did come back for their parents' funerals. My grandfather passed away in 1979, and my grandmother passed away in 1986. The Quints did come, the 3 surviving Quints at that time, because Emily passed away young in 1954 at the age of 20. As a matter of fact, I never had the opportunity to meet her because she passed away 2 months after I was born. So you count how old I am?
Yeah, I know how old.
And Marie passed away in 1970. So that left Yvonne, Annette, and Cecile. Mm-hmm. And
was it just because it was like, hey, we're not going back there?
Well, yeah, I think the province, North Bay and the surrounding area kind of left a bitter taste in their mouth on how they were treated and brought up. And
How long before the lawsuit ended up coming to a settlement?
the lawsuit was settled with the Ontario government in the mid to late 1990s.
Yeah.
Now, the sum there, I don't know if you're aware of the sum that was paid out to the Dionne family. It was paid out to the Dionne family. The only ones that saw the money were the surviving 3 Quints at that time and their families. I'm still waiting for my share of the money, but I'm not holding my breath on that one. It was just shy of $4 million.
yeah, I thought so. I was in my head. I was thinking it was like 3 point something or
Big
3.8 or
discrepancy
something.
between $4 million and when you look back at the $500 million back in 1934.
1934, they generated $500 million, which I don't know what that would equate to today, but it would be in the billions.
You're in the billions.
Yeah, you're in the billions.
And that's all the spin-off economic impact of the businesses, or is that the actual revenue from every business?
Businesses, yeah. What happened was any business was allowed to use their images on their products to make the businesses money. And so that's part and parcel of it. The government made money. The doctor made money. The
North Bay Nugget made money?
Oh, yeah.
city of North Bay made money.
Yeah.
Calendar made money.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the south end of Lakeshore Drive, all the old motels on.
Yeah. That would
Why
have been,
are they there? They've been there since this event.
Your
Right.
favorite doctor made a bunch of money?
Oh, he certainly did. Yeah. Look at the beautiful house that's now the museum in Calendar. Yeah.
Well, tell us like the burst, just the reality of his role in the actual burst.
Oh, well, he was summoned by the midwives. So he appeared on the scene as the midwives. There were 2 midwives present, one of them being my grandmother's aunt. Madame Lebel and Madame Legros were present. They delivered they were in the process of delivering the 3rd Quint. So the first 2 had already been born. That would be Yvonne and Annette. They were in the process of delivering Cecile when the doctor came on the scene. He then stood by and watched as Emily and Marie were delivered by the by the midwives. Then he stood back and he looked at the babies and he made a statement to the midwives, they're not going to be life come daylight, I'm going home. Walked out the door, got in his car, and drove back to his house. Returned come daylight, saw that they were alive. Look what I did. And who's going to argue with him? He's the doctor.
He's the doctor. Yeah. They speak from the pulpit, right?
Yeah. Recognized an opportunity when he saw one.
Yeah, well, a lot of people recognized opportunities when they saw it.
What I find fascinating about this interview, Dave, compared to the other ones we do, it seems like you're the optimistic one. And I'm the pessimist in this one. It's the roles have shifted a bit because the story is so tragic.
Yeah.
It's so tragic. And I think it's important that the whole story is told. Well, the tale.
This is why I'm cynical. These stories like this, how the government acted, how people capitalized on it. This is the stuff that makes me cynical. So that's why,
Hey, this is all about community and local stories and learning and having a voice. If you have a story that you would like to be told, we'd love to hear about it. And Dave, how can they contact us?
Well, first thing, just go subscribe to the newsletter and send the editor at NorthBayEcho.ca an email, and I'll get back to you.
I'm right into this. I want to hear more from Brian. And let me ask about the court case, because you said something there which I wasn't aware. So 3.8, in my head, I'm thinking $3.8 million.
Just shy of $4 million. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So and that went to the three surviving Dionne Quintuplets.
And the children of the three that did have...
okay, that didn't survive.
No, three of the Quints did marry and have children. So,
okay.
But Marie had two children, but she had passed on when the settlement was made.
So why not
But her
the whole
children
family?
got part of that money too.
Why not the whole family?
Well,
as you went, or not,
you'd
I'm
have
just
to
kidding
ask.
You're not that old.
You'd have to ask the Mike Harris government.
But there must have been a legal team on the family's behalf in that.
Well, they
might have been representing the surviving quintuplets and themselves, and not necessarily. Well, when you're negotiating a settlement like this, there's always just like a contract negotiation. So you're negotiating away somebody else's share to bolster the share of somebody, right? So I'm not aware exactly what went on, but I can only imagine that unless other parts of the family had a lawyer at the table, they weren't being represented fully.
Right. Yeah,
right? No. Nobody's arguing for them. They're going to be arguing for the main course. And that, of course, the government would be, and their negotiators would be trying to whittle it down as much as possible. So every person that's taken away from the puzzle or the pie requires less of a pie. Right?
I guess in my head I was thinking that whoever was representing the family represents the family, but it's been so messed up since 1934 that that their representation was never great with the government.
Yeah,
right?
and I guess we'd have to look at everybody that was at the table, but we can only imagine that they just weren't worried about the rest of the family.
Well, it's a prime example of what you would refer to as snafu. And we'll leave it at that.
Mm-hmm. Did your mom ever share like great memories? There must have been some great memories.
Not really.
Okay.
Like I grew up. Most of the other siblings remained in this area. The ones that did get married raised their children in this area, and we were close back in the day. We'd be down at my grandparents' almost every weekend visiting and spending time with everybody. My uncle had a farm just down the road, and play with my cousins there, and I'd sit and I'd listen to their stories. And
can you share? Maybe
it wasn't real happy.
Kind of laced with bitterness, probably.
Yes, it was. All you had to do if you wanted to get them excited was mention the number 5 or things like that.
Again, I go back to my arrival here. It's always been just sort of in my understanding that the family had all left, but no, it was the Quints.
Yeah.
And so a large part of the family were here, but not even in our history recognizing that, hey, a big part of the family is all here that experienced that whole thing.
See, originally, before the Quints were born, they already had 6 children, one of which, Leo, only lived for less than 2 months. So when they were born, he was out of the scene. He was long departed. My mother was the 3rd oldest out of the 5 alive when the Quints came on the scene. Then afterwards, they had 3 more. The last one, my uncle Claude, wasn't born until 12 years after the Quints.
Wow.
He was only 8 years older than me when I was growing up. Wow. He was my good play buddy growing up. And later on in life, he was my good beer drinking buddy.
Well, that's positive. There you go.
He lived actually just down the road. He lived right next to my grandparents when they built their smaller house, and he built a house right beside them on the same driveway. Mm-hmm. So they lived together. Then my uncle Ernest actually started his family in the staff house that had housed the nursing staff and the police officers at the time. And then he built a house next door to that, to the big house. And my Uncle Danny actually started his family in the original Dionne house, bought it from my grandfather. And
so the one that we tour?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then he ended up selling it when it was moved to Pinewood Park Drive. And then the house, there's now another house across the road from Nipsing Manor. He built that house for his family on the prop right where the museum house used to be.
Okay. And do you remember, what year was it the birth home moved to Seymour in the bypass?
Oh, Seymour in the bypass. I think that was in the
Early 80s?
Early 80s,
Yeah.
I think, because it was in the 60s, I think, that it was moved to Pinewood Park Drive originally.
Okay.
And it was in 2 different spots on Pinewood Park Drive beside the old Pinewood Park Motor Inn. They had originally placed it, as far as I understand, further back from the road, and then they brought it closer to the road to bring in the tourists.
Mm-hmm. And I would think still at that time, there would still be a number of tourists. It was probably quite a tourist attraction at one time, right?
Well, hey, it's picking up now.
Yeah.
The last 8 years since it's been moved to where it is now, there's one day, Canada Day last year, fell on a Saturday. We had I was there for it, we had over 300 people come through that house on a Saturday.
Yeah. That's fantastic. And how do you feel about that when it... what are your emotions?
I'm privileged to see everybody's interested in it. We don't charge admission. That's probably because of me. I made it my goal that enough money was made off the name Dionne that we didn't want to continue down that road.
Yeah.
So that's primarily why we don't charge admission. I hope that in the future it won't change, because I'd be very disappointed it's city-owned property, and you know what city politics usually is, make money. They let the board of directors run it for them, and we're strictly volunteer business, and it's just the board of directors that do the tours on the Fridays and Saturdays. That's why we only open on Fridays and Saturdays, because we don't have the manpower to do any other day of the week. But any other day of the week's not really busy anyway. So
now as you share, as I'm starting to understand better, and I really appreciate you coming in and chatting with us, and I'm just watching it from afar, during the time when the city had sold the property where the chamber was and where the Dionne's home was, a lot of controversy. And the controversy was, don't want it, this. Okay, there's a group set up. We'd like to move it. Well, we're not paying for it. So when you start sharing these stories, I think to myself, were you pissed off when it's like, are you kidding me? This family put this city on the map. You benefited from it, and you're not going to give us whatever it is, 20 grand or whatever this nominal amount of money it was to move this home over.
Well,
Is that a fair question?
Yeah, I only came on the scene after it was moved. I wasn't part of the original fight to keep the house here. That was Jeff Fournier and his group of people before I came on. Then when I came on, they were looking for people that wanted to join the board of directors, and I contacted them and asked, would you consider having a family member on the board?
I hope they jumped up and down,
said,
yes.
Oh, by all means.
Yeah.
So that's when I came on board, and that was just when the house was moved. So that would be late 2017.
2017.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's great that you were involved because you brought a very thick sense of reality to the situation and shared the true stories, and it helped Jerry write his musical so that it was balanced with more of a reality-based and in-depth stuff. You're stepping away from the museum board now, taking a break. Is there any reason for that?
There's several reasons. The main one is I find myself burnt out telling the story. It's a lot of emotion when I put the story out there because it's coming from my heart, and I keep thinking my mom, with what she went through, especially in her latter years, suffering the way she did, but. And she just passed away 3 years ago. And I'll tell you the honest to God truth, she had dementia for quite a few years leading up to that. And when I became involved with the Dionne Museum, it's probably a good thing she had dementia, because if she would have known that I was involved with the house and the museum, she would have disowned me.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, that's powerful.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so a deep vein of resentment and just pissed offness at life and how the family was treated. Yeah, that's a terrible thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a story that had to be told my way, the family way. We focus on the entire family, not just the five.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
Or the board of directors does now, not me.
Yeah. Can we just quickly, just because we've really set sort of a stage that, there was a lot of people that benefited from the name and the family really didn't. And when Jerry Mendocino came, because I was in the first show that he had done, and he's going to have another one coming up, Jerry isn't benefiting from the name. Like he was involved with you.
No.
He's telling the story and and has your blessing. And
any monies that are made off of that just go to pay the actors, and it doesn't profit.
He's actually invested tens of thousands of dollars of his own money to make this musical go.
Yeah, he's lost money.
Yeah.
And
I know when we were doing it, he gave a check at the end. I go, what is this? I thought it was volunteering.
that was out of his pocket.
It was out of his
pocket. There was no proceeds.
Wow.
That's one of the problem with putting an event on at the Capitol Center, which is a great venue. It's just so large and so hard to recoup the initial outlay for something that doesn't sell out at big price, right? Mm-hmm. The Davidi Club is probably the right size for what he wants to do going
That'll be
forward.
A great dinner beforehand.
And it's going to there's an evolution. We actually have Lisa had interviewed him for a podcast coming up where he describes the new musical and the event and his own career. So that's cool. And it's along those same lines, though. I'd like to know your opinion on what you think of how City Council has supported the museum up to this point. In the last couple of years?
Well, there was a time 2 years ago when we had put in a request to City Council asking for $5,000, and they denied it. And I almost left right then and there because one of the gentlemen on our board of directors was also a city councillor, and he voted against giving us the money.
Oy, oy.
Yeah.
So,
And he's no longer on the board, eh?
no, he's not.
Yeah. And
You're like a lawyer. You know the answers to these questions, don't you? You know all the answers.
I didn't say Chris Maney's name.
I know you didn't. I'm perfectly clear that you didn't.
And I didn't say it either.
That's the difference when you and I are in an interview. I actually don't know the answer. You actually know all the answers.
Well, it's an issue.
Yeah, $5,000.
Yeah, it's a small amount of money, and they needed it for was it for capital even?
Yeah, just
for the building that's on their property.
Yeah, exactly. And it's their building.
Yeah, and you guys are taking care of the operating, which brings people into the community.
Yeah.
So I can understand why it might have been frustrating. That's part of the frustration that mounts in wearing you out.
Well, yeah. I don't know. It's a combination of things. It's there's been a little bit of, I guess we could call it animosity between myself and a few members on the board as well. So
Conflicting visions.
well, from what I can see is when I was on the board, I was basically the front, because I'm the family member that's fronting the tours and stuff like that, and the other volunteers that are doing the tours are giving my story, following my leads on the tours, so that it's basically just repeating what I'm doing and copying it. But then there's some people on the board that want to be front and center, and from what I can tell, and they're not happy unless
They're front and center.
they're putting their names out there saying, I did this, I did that, I want to be recognized, kind of thing. And so you know what?
Well, sometimes it's healthy for a board to, for one or two members to step aside and give the ball to them and see what they can do with it and get out of it, because it's just wearing you down fighting.
Yeah, well, yeah. So the way I look at it now is, now that I've pulled the pin, I get to put my boat back in the water. I haven't used my boat in 3 years.
I'm hoping we get our lines wet there sometime this summer. That'd be cool, kind of cool.
Yeah. So I live on Trout Lake, so I can stay home on Fridays and Saturdays, put my feet up, drink a beer, and have the dogs running around and
You
go
deserve
swimming.
that for sure.
Yeah.
What would you say to people who, like, I know some people that when I did the features in the magazine, Back in the Bay magazine, and then I did the stories to promote the musical. The response from some people was still, well, you're just taking advantage of them again. You're just appropriating it, or you're doing the same thing you're talking about, no matter what you're saying, just by doing the story. So
I've heard that, and I don't understand their reasoning behind that. We're not charging admission. We're not making money off of them. We do accept donations, which most places do for something like that. It's just to keep our landscaping going and stuff like that. So the donations are just put back into what we're doing. Nobody's making any money off of it.
Yeah, I didn't make any money off it.
No. But I enjoyed my time with them, because I got to meet people from all over the world. You wouldn't believe it. New Zealand, Australia, China.
There's a documentary crew from France, wasn't there?
Yeah,
wow.
exactly. And actually, they spent a day here interviewing me, and they put a tourism documentary for the province of Ontario that's been released in Germany. And I'm a segment of that where my voice is dubbed into German, and it's going to be released in France, dubbing into French and stuff like that. I also did a Zoom with a filmmaker from Wales, Sarah Lawton. Actually, she's coming for the 90th birthday weekend, and she's flying back out on the Tuesday. On the Monday following the birthday party, she's coming to my house. I'm going to host her at my house, and because she wants to interview me for the story because her background is she actually, I believe it was 2014, gave birth to 4 babies in Wales, one of which passed away, so she was left with 3, but they were treated basically the way the Quints were, like a sideshow. And that's what got her interested in multiple births. And so she's wants to pursue that avenue. So I'm looking forward to that.
Well, very much appreciate you taking the time of your day.
Well, I appreciate
joining
it
us
too.
here.
And
Right.
I enjoyed it.
Yeah, great having you in here.
I thought it'd be a lot worse.
Most people do when they come in here.
Well, I really enjoyed listening to Brian tell his side of the story and to talk about what's important. And I really felt the anguish of how he felt for his mother having to deal with all that.
Yeah,
Right?
He got quite emotional when he was talking about his mom, and you have a personal relationship. I'm getting the sense you did when you talked about fishing and And what's he like outside
Well, he
of this?
subscribes to the magazine, of course, because I've done some stories on
all your friends subscribe to the magazine. Is what you're saying?
Yeah, actually, all my best friends.
Have I
I don't see
subscribed?
you on the list. I don't see you on the list.
I want you to chase me more. But what's he like fishing or hanging out? And
Well,
is he
we
much
haven't
different?
fished together yet.
Okay.
We've had a couple beers. We've talked. I've been at the museum and sort of documented him talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
So we've had a chance to. I think he used to read my columns and he likes my style of as well. So and he lives just down the road from my mechanic Jerry's Auto.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of a crossover there. I've seen
okay.
him there a couple times too.
I think so. We need to encourage people. It's like you need to be a tourist in your own home, and rarely we do it.
Yeah.
So make a point of it to visit the Dionne Quints home. Make a donation. They don't ask for admission, so make a donation to keep that thriving and support the story. And so, do you know when Jerry Mendocino is doing his musical again?
As part of the 90th birthday celebration, he'll be doing the musical at the DeVita Club on May 25th.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, and tickets are still available?
Yeah,
Yeah.
the tickets are available. Yeah.
Through the DeVita Club, and it'll be great. It'll be I know the show and
Before
Jerry's
we go,
style.
one more thing.
Yeah.
Please like, share, and comment on North Bay Echo podcasts. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Every time somebody interacts with one of our things, it gets a boost in the algorithm, and that helps us grow. So it doesn't cost you anything. And a little favor to us, just a like, a share, a recommendation.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
We'll be back again next week, and I'm Scott Clark.
And I'm Dave Dale. Thanks for joining the Echo Essentials podcast.